But first, some of the news that we've been covering at the Electronic Intifada. Palestinians across the Gaza Strip gathered to mark the end of Ramadan today on Eid al-Fitr. In Jabalia refugee camp, where every single one of the mosques have been destroyed by Israel over the last 6 months, Palestinians recited the Eid prayers outside in the pouring rain.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
The Israeli army withdrew most of its ground forces from the southern Gaza Strip over the weekend, but Israeli airstrikes have not stopped across Gaza. On Monday and Tuesday, Israel bombed areas in Deir al-Balah and Maghazi and Nuseirat refugee camps. Hatem al-Gamri, the mayor of Maghazi, was killed in an Israeli airstrike on the camp. The Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza reported that since October 7th, approximately 34,000 Palestinians have been killed and 76,000 injured, with many thousands more missing or buried under the rubble. Earlier today, Israel targeted and killed 3 sons and grandchildren of Hamas Politburo chief Ismail Haniyeh in an airstrike on their car near Shati refugee camp. In Khan Yunis, after the Israeli army withdrew, activist and journalist Maha Husseini tweeted that, quote, "Not a single home isn't bombed, not one building isn't scorched. Walking through the neighborhoods, you cannot help but sense Israel's palpable desire for revenge against an entire population." Palestine Red Crescent Society staff were able to survey the damage Israeli forces had inflicted on Al-Amal Hospital in Khan Yunis, the medical organization's headquarters, after Israel's 43-day siege forced the hospital to suspend all services on March 26th. The Palestine Red Crescent reported that Israeli occupation forces destroyed PRCS vehicles, including ambulances, that were parked in front of Al-Amal Hospital before the soldiers withdrew from the area. They also stated that, quote, "After the withdrawal of Israeli occupation forces from the vicinity of Palestine Red Crescent Society Al-Amal Hospital in Khan Yunis on April 7th, the extent of the significant damage to the hospital's facilities became evident. The occupation forces raided the hospital, resulting in the destruction of medical equipment, nursing rooms, intensive care units, the ophthalmology department, the emergency operations room, and ambulances." During the Israeli siege on the Al-Amal Hospital, Palestine Red Crescent Society staff said that one of their colleagues, a nurse named Mohammed Abed, was fired on by Israeli soldiers when evacuating medical teams and patients. For about 2 weeks, quote, "his fate remained unknown as the ambulance crew was prevented from transporting him. Mohammed Abed's body was found on Sunday, quote, identified through the uniform of the Palestine Red Crescent Society, which was supposed to provide him with protection." They said that Mohammed was dedicated to his work, continuing to provide medical services to patients and the wounded despite the hospital siege, which lasted 43 days. Rest in peace, Mohammed, the Palestine Red Crescent Society stated. With Mohammed's killing, the Red Crescent added, the number of their personnel killed by Israeli forces in Gaza while performing their humanitarian duties has risen to 16. Over the weekend, Palestinian civil defense crews began retrieving bodies and body parts from the grounds in and around Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City, following the 2-week slaughter carried out by Israeli forces before they withdrew last week. The Geneva-based Euromed Human Rights Monitor reported that forensic, ambulance, and civil defense crews uncovered bodies from pits dug by the Israeli army in the hospital courtyard. Gaza's civil defense says that more than 400 bodies have been recovered since the Israeli army's retreat. Motassem Salah, director of the Gaza Emergency Operations Center, told Agence France-Presse that, quote, "the stench of death is everywhere," as a bulldozer went through the rubble and rescue workers pulled decomposed bodies from the sand and ruins. Speaking to the AFP agency, Salah said that Gaza lacked the forensic experts needed to help identify the dead or determine what had happened to them. So they are relying on the expertise of delegations with the World Health Organization and the UN's Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. They are trying, quote, to identify the decomposed bodies and the body parts that were crushed from wallets and documents, he told AFP. Salah added that the psychological impact of this unwatchable process on the families is unbearable, AFP reported. The United Nations stated that, quote, following 6 attempts to reach Al-Shifa Hospital that were either denied, delayed, or impeded by Israeli authorities during the 2-week assault, the World Health Organization reported that the scale of devastation has left what was once the largest and most important referral hospital in Gaza completely non-functional, with substantial efforts needed to clear unexploded ordnance, assess the potential for making the facility safe and accessible, and evaluate the functionality of vital equipment such as ventilators and CT scanners. Most hospital buildings, including the emergency department, the surgical and maternity ward buildings, and the neonatal intensive care department, were extensively damaged or burnt, along with most of the equipment, beds, incubators, the oxygen plant, and other assets. As a result, according to the World Health Organization, northern Gaza has been left without any CT scanning capabilities, significantly reduced laboratory capacity, and only one source for medical oxygen production at Kamal Adwan Hospital, quote, severely compromising effective diagnosis, which will increase avoidable deaths. 𝐄𝐥𝐞, the bureaucratic arm of Israel's occupation, boasted this week that it had increased the number of international humanitarian aid trucks being allowed to enter Gaza, and announced that it had opened both the Ashdod port and the 𝐓𝐻𝐻 crossing in northern Gaza for humanitarian aid deliveries. The announcement came after Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and U.S. President Joe Biden spoke on the phone following Israel's drone strike on the World Central Kitchen workers last week. However, the United Nations confirmed on Tuesday that the 𝐓𝐻𝐻 crossing, quote, remains closed, contrary to what Israel promised 4 days ago. 𝐓𝐻𝐻 crossing and the Ashdod port are still not operational, despite what was announced, the UN added. Quote, at the moment, Israel only allows trucks to pass through Rafah and to a lesser extent through Kerem Shalom, both in the south. The spokesperson for the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs explained why the truck entry figures reported by the Israeli government differ from those reported by the UN. Israel counts the trucks it inspects and lets in, and the UN counts those that arrive at its warehouses. Between these 2 steps, the spokesperson said, there are problems. First, the trucks entering are half-loaded, a requirement Israel has imposed. They then force Egyptian drivers to unload and leave before Palestinian trucks and drivers can pick up the cargo, something that often does not happen until the next day and makes it impossible to compare day-to-day figures. UN trucks are loaded and accounted for as fully loaded, the UN stated. Some of the humanitarian aid trucks that are making it into the Gaza Strip are carrying much-needed medications and medical supplies to partially functioning hospitals or medical clinics and field hospitals. But physicians say that the medicine and food is only a drop in the bucket compared to what is really needed to address Israel's engineered crisis of starvation and bodily harm due to 6 months of this genocide. This is Wissam Al-Sekni, media director at Kamal Adwan Hospital in northern Gaza, speaking to Al Jazeera on Monday.
Shipment of medicines yesterday is not enough compared to the urgent needs of citizens due to the high rates of malnutrition among them, along with the shortage of some food and medicines for these children, whom you can see in the background behind me in the children's nursery. Most of the children come into the hospital with malnutrition, especially premature babies, due to the malnutrition of the mother, and that affects the mother and other patients.
I'm not only suffering because of her, but also because of all the children. Every child is suffering from malnutrition, and every day we lose 5 or 10 children.
That was Wissam Al-Sekni of Kamal Adwan Hospital speaking to Al Jazeera. Legendary Palestinian activist, poet, and novelist Walid Daqa died in an Israeli prison this week after Israeli authorities refused to release him after he completed his 37-year sentence and was battling myelofibrosis, a rare form of bone marrow cancer. Daqa, who is 62, was born in the Palestinian city of Baqa al-Gharbiyeh in present-day Israel, where he was a citizen. He was arrested by Israeli occupation forces in March of 1986 for allegedly participating in armed resistance as a member of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, a leftist political party. Israeli authorities sentenced him with a maximum imprisonment term of 37 years. As of 2023, Daqa completed that sentence. But in 2017, Israel extended his detention by 2 years on the grounds that he had smuggled phones into his cell with the assistance of a lawmaker from the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. Adamir, the Palestinian prisoners' rights group, said last year that Daqa was, quote, in dire need of urgent medical attention. The Israeli prison service doctor assigned to treat Daqa prescribed medications that severely compromised his immune system and increased his risk of infections. Adamir called for his immediate release from prison, but Israel refused and ordered his release date for 2025. Particularly cruel is the Israeli prison service's policy of refusing to give Daqa's body to his grieving family, withholding his body until his 2025 sentence is over. Last year, my colleague Tamara Nassar wrote that, quote, Daqa, who spent the majority of his life in Israeli prison, authored multiple books while incarcerated, including a children's book on the Israeli occupation of Palestine titled The Oil's Secret Tale. Israeli prison authorities punished him for it, placing him in solitary confinement. In 1999, Daqa married his wife Sana Salama from prison, and in 2020, the couple had a daughter, Milad, who was conceived with sperm smuggled from prison. On Monday, the Israeli police raided Walid Daqa's home and the condolences tent, assaulted his family, arrested several mourners, and confiscated the tent. Adamir stated on Monday that, quote, today Daqa departs, leaving behind a message he wrote in his 36th year inside the occupation's prisons, saying, I will continue to love you all, for love is my humble and sole victory over my jailer. And finally, protesters are continuing to loudly shame U.S. political cheerleaders of Israel's genocide wherever they go. In New York City, protesters disrupted an event this week featuring accomplished war hawk Hillary Clinton.
The national story or stories that we need to tell now.
Will we
Hillary
Clinton,
starving in Gaza because of you. How many women you will not be remembered in history?
And students at Arizona State University this week confronted blood-soaked Democratic Party elites David Axelrod and Nancy Pelosi.
Pelosi, you are complicit in genocide. The blood of over 15,000 Palestinian babies is on your hands. How can you be a Democrat and say you hold democratic values while over 100,000 innocent Palestinian civilians have been massacred with bombs that you paid for? We will not be shamed into voting for you or Genocide Joe and your massacreist policy. My family back home in Palestine is being killed. Their blood is on your hands. And David Axelrod, shame on you and every one of the Democratic elites that want to shame us for voting for Genocide Joe. 80% of Democrats support a ceasefire. Shame on you. Shame on you.
And that's just some of the news from on the ground in Palestine and across the world over the last few days. Please go to electronicintifada.net to read some of our crucial new features by writers in Gaza, now up on our homepage.
Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit like, leave a comment. These engagements help us with the YouTube algorithm, and it helps us to get around Silicon Valley censorship as much as possible. It does make a difference. You can also support our journalism by going to electronicintifada.net and clicking on donate now. Thank you.